Hello everybody and welcome to another Wheel of Time video here on the channel where I'm going to be going over my predictions for Season 2. I do not know if these will come true, but after rewatching the season a couple of times and reading the books more times than I care to admit, this is where I think the narrative could go. And of course I'll be revisiting this video once the season is out to see just how far off the mark I was. Before we get into it though, I would like to say yes, the Wheel of Time reread will be continuing here on the channel starting next Thursday. So if you are not caught up, it's literally been months. Why is this taking you so long? Read faster. And of course there's going to be a spoiler warning for Season 1 of the Wheel of Time as well as Book 2 and 3. You have been warned. So let's go ahead and kick off with what I think they're going to do with Matt. This is obviously the biggest question for the show. The actor had to be recast, and Barney Harris leaving seemed to have caused some pretty large rewrites for the last couple of episodes, as well as probably some shuffling around of some stuff earlier on. It's a big deal when an actor leaves, and now we have Donald Flynn replacing him, someone who I'm really looking forward to seeing how they're going to embody the character, and I wish the actor the best of luck. It is not an easy task to take over where another actor left off, especially when their performance was pretty loved by fans. But the last we saw of Matt, he was walking into Tar Valon, trying presumably to get his dagger back, and Moraine had apparently sent a letter or message to the Red Aja warning of his possible attempted heist of the knife. An obvious question I want to address up front is, will they actually acknowledge within the narrative that Matt looks different? I do not think so. There probably will be a throwaway line of like, you look blah, 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 because no writer can ever, resist writing some kind of meta joke about a recasting. I'm kind of tired of it, but I predict it will happen. But if I had to place a bet, I don't think they will directly address the fact that Matt is a different actor. But what we will see is Matt creeping into the tower he has broken in, and he will be trying to get at the dagger. A trap from the Red Aja will be sprung, and they will seize him. Now, Matt is going to be roughed up a bit, but I don't think the Red Aja is going to outright do anything beyond just their typical seizing a man doing something wrong. He can't channel, and they can't really hurt him by gentling him because that's not something you can do to someone who can't channel. What we will get, though, is a healing scene much more similar to what we see in the book, because he has to have that. What Moraine did, I think, will be narratively written off as like a patch fix, and now we will get the actual intense healing of Matrim Coffin. And if they are going to be addressing changing the actor within the narrative, we will have not seen Matt's face directly in this point. He'll either be in shadows or cloaked, and then his face will be revealed once he's actually pulled out from the healing, or they'll maybe have like deep faked Barney Harris, though I don't know if Amazon has the rights to do that, or Barney Harris could even show back up for a couple quick shoots to do this. I'm not sure. But the healing process will reveal the new Matt to us. And now we're at a point where we have diverged from the books in timeline, but the character has accomplished a lot of what they've had in the books, and they're at least positioned to pick up where they've left off if you're not going to have Matt blow the horn like he does in book 2, because he could essentially just stay in Tar Valon until he needs to go to the Stone of Tyr and accomplish what he needs to. I do believe they will try and get Matt to Falma, and here's how. So Matt is going to be wandering around the tower slowly healing, and this will actually allow us to be introduced to Gawain, Galad, and Elaine, because Matt is here without his friends, and he's going to do his probably most iconic Matt moment in all of the Wheel of Time, which is taking down the two noble boys with his quarterstaff. Through this, we get introduced to these characters, which we have missed out on so far, and we also meet Elaine, and that will be, I think, probably at the point the show's at, the best way to introduce these characters. With what we know of how Rafe wants to play up Loghain's role, I also think it'll be neat if we get some scenes where Matt and Loghain are talking. We can get two perspectives that are pretty much being held by the tower and not a very big fan of it, to further flesh out the levels of corruption and political conflict happening within. That would be fascinating and a great utilization of the characters, as season 1 had to leave them. With Matt kind of being stuck here until other characters show up as well, it'll be a good amount of time for Matt to be written and fleshed out with this new performance and allow us, the audience, to connect with him before too much narratively really rides on his shoulders. Maybe they could even introduce Tom again here, I'm not entirely sure. But he will be here until Egwene and Nynaeve show up. And that's where we're going to switch on over to what I think the show is going to do with them. So after the events of season 1, they just displayed an ungodly amount of power, and they need to be brought in for training. Maybe there'll be some kind of conflict where Moraine will be like, no, they're under my protection, but someone will be like, you can't channel. And then they'll be taken in to the White Tower. And that's how I think they will eventually get there. They'll take a more direct, faster route than any other characters moving, because they need to justify them having some time in the tower to train before they are then sent off to Falma through the Black Aja, where they are going to be trapped. For those of you who decide to stick around and don't know what I'm talking about, basically they go to the White Tower. They are convinced to go on a secret mission by some Aes Sedai, except that Aes Sedai turns out to be Black Aja and is luring them into a trap where they are seized by the Shan to be taken and leashed. So I'm predicting we're still going to see all of that. It's just going to happen in a more direct way, probably in the last few episodes after all this time of justifying their movement here. As I said, spoilers for books 2 and 3. You had your warning. But this will reunite them with Matt and hopefully give them a couple of beats to actually get training in the White Tower. I really want to see that. And this could even narratively set up and justify their willingness to leave the White Tower if they're not exactly having the best time. We can also have Nynaeve and Egwene introduced to Elaine Gowand and Galad through Matt, which will, somewhat set up the relationships we see in the books. As I've said before, I don't think we're going to get the Morghese plotline at all here, so this is kind of a way to smoothly introduce them without having to touch on that plotline that I don't think the show will address. But once they are all settled in and get a bit of training, reuniting with Matt, meeting all these characters, they will be sent on a similar trajectory by the Black Aja that we see in the books, which will result in them being in Falma. If they're going to bring Matt, he will just be brought along with them in the fold, and then you're kind of largely ending up where the books did for the ending of season 2, at least for these characters. I do think we will see this trap play out in a very similar way we do in the books, where Egwene is taken while the others manage to escape, and through this lens we will have multiple scenes where we have Nynaeve, possibly Men gets tied into the fold here as well, I'm not sure, all learning about the Shan-Chan, their way of life, and we will directly see Egwene sustaining a tremendous amount of abuse at their hands. This show has shown us they like to set up people who aren't necessarily in the shadow, but are real pieces of poo-poo, and I think they're also going to do that with the Shan-Chan, so it's going to be more brutality from them and really showing how they are using people who can channel, which will be a really interesting angle for people who are just getting into this series for the first time with the show. So that will not be lost. I think it's important and will be really where we spend most of our time with Egwene and Nynaeve and whoever's with them in the latter half of the season, probably Elaine too. Gawyn and Galad hooked in too? No, they'll be left in the tower. Now, the trickier part is going to be Rand. We desperately need him to go to Falma. The ending of season 1 with the Shan-Chan reveal directly showed us Falma's happening. And so how do we get Rand, who's gone off on his own, to circle back in and be a part of this wider narrative? Actually simpler than you might think. The show still needs to do a lot of explaining of the dream worlds, foretellings, and the Forsaken. While Rand is off on his own, unprotected, I think he's going to be interacting with them a lot. This will be an excuse narratively to have him manipulated, taken to a darker route than he is in the books, fast-tracking past the more angsty Rand and diving into dark, mad Rand. Something that narratively is a bit more interesting for a wider audience outside the books, and it helps condense that storyline you need for these seasons of television. Of course, he will meet a beautiful woman along the way in his travels. Maybe he'll even meet up with someone like Huron on his own who just happens to be around. I'm not sure. But I don't think we're going to get the world hopping we necessarily saw in The Great Hunt with him. Because while it is a very fascinating part of the lore, it's not going to do too much narratively within the seasons to keep the momentum going. And if you're going to simplify the dream world, just keeping it to Teleron-Riyadh and not necessarily exploring these multiple realities folded into one main reality, it's just something that can be lifted out pretty easily. So the biggest cuts I'm predicting so far are Morghese's plotline being set up, because I don't think we're going to get that at all, and Rand not jumping to all these different realities, seeing all these different worlds. And I do also think that means we're possibly going to lose the flicker here, because in the books, it really serviced as, yes, to show Rand going to a darker place, and maybe we will get something with him solo that's similar, but it really had a beautiful moment between Matt and Rand in the books, where Matt promised to never betray Rand, and you saw he was so shaken by seeing all these different realities. Because of where the characters are now positioned at the end of season 1, you can't really have that, at least not yet. So I don't think we're going to see that in season 2. But after manipulation and crazy dark things happening that are going to tie in actually more similar to book 3 than book 2, Rand is going to be lured to Falma. I think this will either be through foretelling or some kind of slip up on the Forsaken's part, where they underestimate maybe him and his power, and he's able to catch a glimpse of something he's not necessarily supposed to. So Rand's then going to head to Falma as well. And finally, that leaves Moiraine, who I think is going to go back to the White Tower with Egwene and Nynaeve. Obviously, we're not going to get a rather iconic scene with Swan, Moiraine, and Rand, because they're separated, and instead she's just going to go through the White Tower and possibly get the shield on her removed, though I'm not entirely sure. Maybe this will be used as an excuse to really well explain what shields are versus gentling, and how you can break them. But with the focus on Moiraine being so heavy in season 1, season 2 I think she will take more of a backseat so that the Emond's Field 5 can come more to the forefront. But once it's clear that Egwene and Nynaeve have been lured to Falma, she will be chasing after them and arrive while the battle occurs. But the only one left is Perrin. Real quick though, I want to reiterate something I'm calling here. We have Liandrin in season 1 being set up for meeting some mysterious man in Morth Harbor. And yeah, okay, of course, all the jokes about that being the clitoris, yeah. But, okay, I actually think that man is going to be revealed to be one of the Forsaken. Specifically the one who, I won't spoil this far to the series yet, is tied into a certain plot line I am saying will be cut, and instead that person will be working with Liandrin here. That's my call, because we need to bring in that person somehow, and I think it will be here. Perrin, I think, will be the one who more directly hunts the horn. This was set up with not only him being the one who watched Fane take it, which still kind of felt like a writing last-minute thing to me, and he will use his wolfy abilities to directly track Padon Fane. It's going to take him a long time, though, and he's going to be kind of maybe having some clashing encounters, slowed down, which will allow everyone the time they need to go through their other plot lines. And I do believe Min may also show up in Falma purely by coincidence, and that could be played as like a comedic line where it's like, it's where she fled to, but oh my god, it's not the place to be. Though she also might end up in the White Tower again and go with the trap that's set, to be determined. Hopefully Perrin also meets Elias during this time, and we get a lot more fleshing out of his wolfy abilities. But okay, we're all at Falma, right? We've managed to get here. Will Matt blow the horn? I think 60-40 shot, 60 yes, 40 no. The way we'll be able to tell, though, is if throughout the season we're constantly getting narrative drops explaining who the heroes of the Horn are, like Arthur Hawkwing or Brigitte the Silverbow, then we're going to actually see the horn be blown by Matt. But if we don't get that, it's not going to be blown. And then the final showdown will happen with Rand in the sky. No. Rand in the sky would look rather goofy, in my opinion. So I think instead Rand is going to have a much more direct and confrontational showdown, possibly in the streets or just in like a high up vantage point where we're able to see the battle in a similar way so we can have that connection still drawn that we get in the books. But either way, having a gargantuan blown up Rand in the sky, it's a cool premise in the books. Could not look good in live action to me. After this fight, though, we'll have Rand severely injured, and the big hook reveal that is almost written perfectly for television, that the beautiful woman who he was encountering on his solo travels and was kind of manipulating, whispering in his ear, is actually Lanfear. I don't think this reveal will be towards who it was in the books. I think instead it might be either Moiraine or Nynaeve. I don't know why, but I just feel like if anyone's going to learn that Lanfear's in play, it's going to be one of those two. I have no justification for that hunch outside of it just being there. Now, if you've noticed, what this allows is for season 3 to follow a much truer to the book trajectory than the previous 2 seasons, which I think might have been the initial plan, but with COVID and an actor leaving, they had to do some divergence. And here we're going to have book 3, which is overall a much simpler narrative to follow, be truer to the books. Matt will end up back in the White Tower and maybe take off from there. I specifically think, while Matt may have gone on this trip, it will cost him dearly in his still healing from what's been done to him in the dagger, and so he'll be brought back to the tower with justification of he needs to be washed over and healed a lot more, and other weird things that book readers know about him will start being observed, so he'll have to break out of the White Tower again. He'll have to be like, oh, I gotta be all sneaky, and actually that's probably where Tom will be reintroduced, getting him out of the city. Having Rand already be a bit mad is going to allow him to run off on a very justified way. If Moiraine is healed, she'll be back in play and leading the chase to him, and they can start laying the seeds for Rand being really insane, which in the books was already there, but in the show, it kind of needs to be more blunt. And with season 2 having him be on a darker path, which I think season 1 sets up very nicely, it could be overall a smoother narrative experience for the visual medium. So pulling from book 3 though, I think we're going to get some stuff with Matt up front because they really want to try to get this actor to win you over. And so allowing him those beats of beating down Galad and Gawain, meeting Elaine, will provide those moments that will be really needed because, let's be honest, book 2, Matt doesn't do a whole lot outside of blowing the horn and having a couple nice moments here and there, and they're going to be really trying to find those to help us, the audience, connect with him. I'm looking forward to seeing this gigantic battle with the Shan-Chan and power on display right and left. It should be pretty interesting, and Falme itself is really a pivotal moment where I think the show can prove, okay, we are stepping it up. You're not going to see battles like at the end of season 1 where we had to do a whole lot of COVID replacements, and here's us on full display. It's going to be kind of a prove it or not moment where, yeah, they've shown they can do some of the smaller narrative plot elements fine, but the big climactic showdown in season 1 was seriously lacking. The editing was poor, the effects were bad, and I think narratively it just didn't feel super earned. So I think a lot of fans for once are allowed to go, okay, there's a logical explanation for why it kind of stepped down. Now you need to prove it. And that's what Falme is going to provide. They gotta knock it out of the park though. But let me know what you think of my predictions in the comments down below. Do you think I'm pretty spot on or very far off, especially with the changes to Matt and Rand? Like and subscribe if you have not already. Check out my books, Breach of Peace and Rebel's Creed. And of course, have a good one, y'all. Peace. And of course, I'd like to record a special shout out to my latest high tier patrons, Eric, Ketchum, and Devlin.